in a world where we think it's just about doing more, one of the biggest changes, and I'll tell you, this is one of the biggest differentiators for a lot of the clients that I work with over 40 here, is like, it's not about doing more. It's about working smarter, not harder. It means what we're doing in the gym is, sure, it's intense, but it's structured in a way where we're not just beating ourselves up just to do more volume. And we're focusing on recovery because your training session is only going to be as good as your recovery. And we're using steps and sleep as parasympathetic drivers. And by the way, we're using nutrition and focusing on digestion and smart supplementation to the degree that when you can put all of those together, then we can really kind of start to optimize things versus a world where I'll just add more and then I'll do this and I'll try this. And we're just spinning our wheels.
Welcome to Design Foundations, the podcast where faith, family health, and true wellness come together. I'm Kelly, an integrative health practitioner, optometrist, and mom who's been where you are. I know how overwhelming it can feel to navigate health challenges for yourself and your family. That's why I'm here, to help you uncover the root causes of those struggles and help you build an unshakable foundation for a thriving life where you feel rooted, replenished, and restored. In each episode, we'll cut through the noise, talk about practical tips, and share real-life stories to encourage and equip you. You've got what it takes to create lasting wellness. I'm just here to help you get there. Let's dive in. All right, welcome back to another episode of Design Foundations. We have a very special guest here, a good friend of mine. This is Ben Brown. He is founder of Body Systems, a global health and nutrition company known for its revolutionary PrimeFit OS system, which has helped clients shed over 15,000 pounds and transform their lives. With more than 2 decades of experience, Ben has worked with Fortune 500 executives, professional athletes, and teams like the Golden State Warriors, Arizona Diamondbacks, and Arizona Cardinals, as well as countless driven individuals seeking sustainable health solutions. Armed with dual master's degrees in exercise and wellness and clinical nutrition, Ben's coaching programs combine the science of real-world data, the psychology of behavior change, and the art of coaching to create lasting results. As a husband and father of 3, Ben draws on his personal and professional experience to empower others to reclaim their energy, confidence, and health freedom, all without the burden of restrictive diets or unsustainable habit change. So welcome, Ben. We're so excited to have you.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Kelly.
All right. So I've known Ben for a very long time. My husband actually found him online as a personal trainer. And so he started seeing him. And then we slowly over the years have kind of all trickled in. I have worked with him as well. A lot of our family members, you're like the go-to.
Right. 7 degrees of Meehan's.
All of us. But you have so much knowledge. And aside from the obvious of just like a body transformation and weight loss, which is really like your wheelhouse and your success, but you're just really good at getting people to understand and put in place the foundations, the basics, which allows them, right, to be consistent with what they are moving forward and able to build upon that. So I wanted to just kind of dig into that today, into some of those basics, the foundations, and really focusing a little bit more on kind of like the woman in her late 30s, early 40s. And you've worked with high-level athletes, you've worked with like highly driven professional women, and you've worked with stay-at-home moms, everyone. So I just want to start with what is like a health struggle that you see to be consistent among all of those groups of people?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is just prioritizing themselves amongst all of the chaos, right? Because one of my pet peeves is when you're talking to someone and you ask how they're doing, like, oh my God, I'm so busy. It's like, listen, we're all so busy, right? We have an innumerable number of things that are on our plate at all times, and the presence of social media and what everyone else is doing, what we think we should be doing, adds so much more perceived stress to the plate. And so oftentimes the conversations as they start out are really acknowledging how we're showing up and how we're prioritizing ourselves and what's realistic within the context of my day-to-day, the structure or lack thereof, and how do we set some realistic expectations based on all the things that I am currently doing, all the things that I want to be able to do, and then identifying like what's getting in the way.
I love that. And it's so true. I think anytime we're trying to make ourselves a priority, especially I think as moms, it's really easy to be like, well, I need to prioritize my kids. I need to prioritize my husband. But the reality is, if we don't prioritize ourselves on some level, we can't show up for our kids, for our husband, and the people around us that need us. And it's definitely a little bit of like a mindset shift. I have a little bit of insight because I've worked as a client. And one of the things that I love that you do is in the very beginning, which honestly I was kind of frustrated with at first, is you're taking assessment, right? We are kind of tracking where things are at. And the point is, where are you at? And it's really great for the client, right? To see like, oh, actually, that's not quite what I thought it was. You talk a little bit about that and just, the process of that and people probably not being where they think they are.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's really, one of the things we say is we want to leverage data to make informed decisions. Like absolutely from a scientific standpoint, and I have a couple different master's degrees and I'm very much rooted in academia and kind of trying to be evidence-based. And this has to do with our calorie intake. It has to do with our caloric expenditure. It has to do with our food quality. But more important than that, what it really comes down to is establishing awareness. And so in our kind of the discovery phase of our program, which is what we call it, or the priming phase of our program, it forces the client to actually have to look in the mirror and take ownership and responsibility over the decisions they're making, because you can't hide from them. If I have you tracking your caloric intake and you're like, yeah, and that glass of wine, which actually was more like 2 glasses of wine based on my pour, and those 3 handfuls of chocolate chips that I grabbed while I was cooking dinner, or those couple extra slices of cheese and the bites of the kids' nuggets. And it's like, when you're tracking all of that stuff, you can't hide from what that actually shows up as in terms of, yeah, you're eating 1,000 calories beyond what you thought you were eating. And just by acknowledging that, you're going to start to change your behaviors, Kelly, to say nothing of the fact that, and this comes down to behavioral psychology, if you also know that I'm looking, right? And I'm not looking in a negative or a judgmental or condescending way in any way, shape, or form. But we know very clearly that our behaviors change when someone else is watching you. And it's this sort of unprecedented level of accountability that we leverage through behavioral psychology to help you change your own behaviors without me having to tell you what to do. Because in many cases, despite you thinking that might be what you want and need, it's not what humans inherently do well with, being told what to do. And we know that in the dieting industry, plain and simple.
I love that. And I know I mentioned I was like frustrating. And what I mean, but I want to clarify, like, it was frustrating that I just wanted you to tell me what to do right away. Right. Which is probably every single person that shows up. My clients do it to me. I had the same exact behavior, but having that awareness and really having to look at that. In my case, I actually wasn't eating enough, which is common, I know, for a lot of women as well. So I wanted to shift a little bit. Let's talk about, let's say like the woman in her 40s. What I hear a lot is like, I'm doing all the right things, or I should say, think I'm doing all of the right things. And all the things that I was doing in my 20s and 30s, all of a sudden feel like I'm not able to make progress, or I'm starting to gain weight in my belly and it's just not working anymore.
Yeah.
What do you say to those guys? Or how do you work to shift some of that?
Well, I think that there's a couple ways of looking at it. At the end of the day, like I said before, is we need to understand what that actually means. Like, what is the tangible, quantifiable things that you're doing, and how have those actually changed over time, right? Because if you tell me, right, I'm doing all of the right things, like I'm eating healthy and I'm quote unquote exercising. Okay, but what does that mean? And just because you got away with things in your 20s and 30s doesn't mean now, after having a couple plus kids, high levels of stress, probably decreased sleep kind of function, all of this stuff really starts to add up, to say nothing of whether perimenopause is in play or hormonal dysregulation, to say nothing of what's your in wheelhouse, like the compounding effects of digestive dysfunction, poor detoxification pathways, just overall stress overload. Right. So there's like a lot to it. But at the end of the day, the first question really is like, what does that actually mean? What actually are you doing? How much are you consuming? How much are you moving? How much are you actually training? What intensity are you actually training with? And are you training in like a logical and systematic and structured way? Are you actually optimizing for sleep? Do you have a sleep routine in place? Do you have ways to manage your stress levels? Because I think it's really easy to get lost in the minutia of I'm doing the right things, but it just kind of means different things for different people. So from there, we just need to get clarity around, okay, well, let's understand what it is that you're actually currently doing. And then let's try and be objective about how we're actually changing those variables. Are you actually controlling for calories? Or are we realizing, yeah, you do great all week long. In fact, maybe you undereat all week long and then throw caution to the wind every weekend, whether you realize it or not, through food and alcohol, and then poor sleep patterns. And then you're playing catch up again every Monday. That's not an uncommon scenario as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I love that when you're like rolling those things out and it's like, are you drinking water? Are you in the sun? Like some of these very basic things that we let go when we think, well, I went to the gym today. So I like, check that off, but I missed some of like of the very obvious.
What I'll just add real quickly, I think what I've observed is there's a very big difference between doing things well sometimes versus truly having dedicated consistency and structure to be able to do them well all of the time. And if we can agree, and I think most people will understand, especially women who are at this stage of the journey, maybe they're in their late 30s or 40s or and beyond, they've probably tried enough stuff to acknowledge that we do understand the importance of calorie intake. We do understand the importance of stress management and getting enough sleep and managing my blood sugar levels. And invariably, what we see is what people think is consistent actually isn't consistent, right? If I was actually to have you take out a calendar and you were actually to check off, did I eat 3 square meals today? And did I have 30 grams of protein with each of those meals? And did I drink 8 cups of water? And did I get 7 to 8 plus hours of sleep? And we can go on with that. But what we would actually see with most people who say I'm doing all of the things is they're probably only at 40 or 50% consistency. When we start to factor in, because then the kids had sports. So we grabbed fast food on the way to practice on Wednesday. And then Thursday, we have a gymnastics meet. And then Saturday, my in-laws are coming and we're going to go out to eat. And so we had brunch and then we had drinks. And right. It's like all of life actually gets in the way of our ability to be consistent with the things that actually are going to help us move the needle.
Yeah. So it's kind of like going to that. So for the woman that's kind of in that scenario, maybe she's reaching like 40, 50%. How do you work through that and being more consistent in their working out or their diet? Like, how do you help them get there? What would be someone's listening? They're like, I know I'm at 40 and 50%. Like, what would be the step that I would take to do better? How would you coach them through that?
Yeah. The first step is just let's acknowledge what are the things that you're willing to commit to right now. And maybe it is like, you know what, we're in agreement that maybe you just need to be moving more consistently and accumulating more steps throughout the day. Because you like go and get your workouts. Maybe you get 3 workouts a week and it's a boot camp class, or maybe you do the Peloton, or you go to the gym and work out with the trainer a few days a week, which is great. But maybe then you're realizing, but I actually sit quite a lot, in which case there's a massive opportunity just to move more. And so then the conversation becomes, well, what can we do? And how can we structure our daily schedule in a way that I can commit to accumulating more steps? And that really does come down to getting really granular, because oftentimes we just do lip service to this, like, I'm going to quote unquote try and move more. And what you're probably another thing that frustrates you, or one of the things that I know frustrates some of our clients, is I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, when are you going to do this?
Yeah.
Well, I'll try and do it after I drop off the kids. Well, you're going to try and do it, or you will do it. How can I be ensured that you're Or how can I know that you're committed to doing this? Is it on your calendar? Right? Do you have your other kids' events on the calendar? Do you have your work business meetings on your calendar? Do you have your travel on your calendar? Do you have your date nights with your significant other? Probably is all on your calendar, but we don't have our meals on our calendar. We don't have our workouts on our calendar. We don't have when we're going to get our walks in. We don't have our bedtime routine or our wake up routine on our calendar. And one of the things we say is, show me your calendar and I'll show you your priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And so it becomes the conversation of like, well, let's put it on your calendar. So can we commit to 10 to 15 minutes of walking after every single meal, right? Well, just by doing that, we're going to get 30 to 45 minutes of extra steps. Is that realistic for you? Can we agree that that's something that you can 100% commit to this week? Great. Now let's go execute. Let's build some momentum, check the boxes, stack some wins, and then we can add kind of the next step. And it really becomes this sort of like habitual growth kind of progress and momentum driver.
Yeah. And making the small steps so that you can have consistent change rather than like the overhauling your lifestyle tomorrow
like
that you'll stick with for a week, right?
That's right. Just tell me exactly what to do. I'll do it. And you won't, because life is chaos. And if you haven't developed the skills to know how to do the things, that's why meal plans don't work. You're like, just tell me what to eat. I could, but you don't know how to prepare. You don't know how to shop. You don't know how to structure it with your family dynamics. What if your husband doesn't like to eat these things? What if you don't like to eat these things?
Right.
It's not realistic.
Yeah. I'm like laughing a little because I was the woman, I mean, to a T, like the woman, oh, I am going to work out today. Yeah, I'm going to do that. But I don't actually love strength training. It's not something that I actually enjoy it much more now that I've been in a very consistent routine of doing it. But I really struggled to do that. So it was the thing, right? That's easily going to tip off the calendar when it was full. And I actually learned from you and like, get it on the calendar. It is an appointment like any other time in your day. And when I started doing that is the time that it was more consistent because I didn't have an excuse anymore. I had already slotted the time. So if I didn't go, then I knew someone was going to know that because it was on the calendar. So it does work. And I've used it. I now use it for my own clients as well. But let's kind of stick on with strength training. Do women, it's all over Instagram, strength train 3 times a week, bone health. But I'm going to ask you, do we really need to strength train, or is walking and yoga enough? Is it just come down to activity? I know what you're going to say, but I'd love you to just talk a little bit about that and like the why behind why do we really need to do that?
What do you think I'm going to say?
I think you're going to say, yes, it needs to be prioritized, but there needs to be a balance and combination of just daily getting our steps in, but also what's attainable for the person in that season at that time.
Yeah. And that's it. It's sort of like, okay, we need to be physically challenged and we need to experience physical resistance and challenge ourselves through enough physical resistance so that the body adapts. And in the old days, right, like 100 years ago, 200, 500, thousands of years ago, through evolution, like humans we are physical beings whose livelihood was dependent on us walking and hunting and foraging and lifting and carrying and right, like being exposed to physical challenges on a daily basis. We are no longer living in that timeline. And so it becomes imperative that we find other ways to do that. Now, is strength training the only way to do that? No. Like, can we do different forms of yoga and perhaps different types of classes and stuff? Absolutely. So I think at the end of the day, it's about committing to something that you enjoy that's going to challenge you, but it also has to be creating the type of stimulus that's going to actually create enough resistance for your muscles to adapt. And the reason this is so important, especially for women, but listen, men are experiencing the same type of sort of metabolic decline by virtue of just not having adequate amounts of muscle tissue. But for all intents and purposes, specifically for women, because you are going to lose lean muscle tissue year after year, especially after the age of 30, to say nothing of menopause, which is when estrogen drops. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have enough lean muscle tissue going into menopause, it puts you at a significantly increased risk of dying from all-cause mortality. Like quality of life goes down, risk of disease goes up. It's just, you name it. You're less likely to be strong, you're more likely to fall, and it's just a whole host of other potential maladies. And so it begs the question of what can we do in our earlier years to not only build the foundation of strength and lean muscle tissue, but also through perimenopause and menopause is like, how can we train in ways that are actually going to be able to support lean muscle mass, especially when our body starts to, and hormones start to degrade in a way that puts muscle at risk, if you will.
Mm-hmm. You're starting to lose it. I actually, most of my life, and I would always like harp at this to Ben, but I love Pilates. I love Pilates. And I still, to this day, I love Pilates. It was wonderful. It is wonderful for strengthening like my core and some of the muscles that I don't use routinely. But I finally did make the switch kind of over to strength training. And I like really fought that. Like in my mind, I like believed that lifting weights was going to make me this like bulky, probably like this body that my genetics would probably never even be able to attain if I wanted to. But I really had that mindset that this is what's good for me. That's not. So I love your approach of just looking at it, not just having like one way, like what do you enjoy? Great. But then incorporate some other things. And one of the things I actually just texted Ben, I mean, not a couple of weeks ago, teasing, and I was teasing with the trainer that I work with, but I was like, I feel like strength training is kind of making me fat. And of course, both of them laughed and you're ridiculous. And I know that I am, but what I was doing, which I think is probably pretty common, is I'm very consistent in strength training. But because I am doing that and checking that off, what I wasn't. And the question back was, well, how many steps are you getting? Are you like, what are you doing outside of that time of the day? And when I actually went and looked at it and became aware, it was really low, like embarrassingly low, because I've been sitting at my computer a lot more. I've been working a lot more. So in my mind, well, I'm like, great, I'm getting this strength training, but that really took a dive and it was making a very big difference. So I'm just sharing that story because I know it's relatable to the people that are listening.
Well, I think it's really important just to acknowledge that is two things. So let me just address kind of the bulky component. I think it's not a valid concern because it doesn't happen that way, but it is a legitimate concern for a lot of women. And so I don't want to poo-poo it because it's important that women understand that physiologically, it is so unlikely for you to actually put on such a significant amount of lean muscle tissue without performance enhancing drugs and anabolic steroids, just with the amount of testosterone that women produce, especially if we're talking about, later on in life, especially with the way, just with training intensity, it's so unlikely.
Just thinking really, really highly of yourself, right? That you could attain.
Yeah, I mean, and if only it were that easy to pack on muscle tissue, right. Do you know how many guys would be walking around absolutely enormous with the level of effort that they put into training? Physiologically, it just doesn't work that way. And so, but what it does do is it will help you completely change your body composition. Mm-hmm. And that is where I'm so excited about the direction that the industry is going. I think CrossFit helped with this a lot to a degree, but I think that also created a little bit of fear around kind of these massive women, which are all on drugs, by the way, but being okay to lift weights, being okay to lift heavy weights, being okay to really challenge yourself in the gym. Because if you want to have more quote unquote muscle tone, more definition, less body fat, look better in your swimsuit, then strength training and lifting weights is the way to do that, is the way to do that. And then the other component that I just wanted to address that you talked about was sort of like acknowledging that from a metabolic standpoint, our metabolism is so finely tuned to keep us in homeostasis that often, and psychologically, when we start doing something new, or if and when we're strength training consistently, it becomes a lot easier for us to justify doing and not doing other things. In other words, maybe because we're training consistently, we feel like we deserve to eat more of certain things. Well, I trained, so I can go ahead and have this dessert or an extra piece of bread or a little bigger serving because I worked really hard in the gym today. And then conversely is also the way that our metabolism works is when I expend calories in one area, I often reduce caloric expenditure in other areas. And this is where, yeah, I'm doing workouts now, but all of the sudden my NEAT, which is essentially your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, this is part of your resting energy expenditure, it starts to go down. So invariably, you just stop moving as much. You stop walking around the house as much. Maybe you're less likely to go out for your walks. Maybe you fidget less. And before you know it, you don't realize it, but you're actually expending significantly less calories than you were before.
Yeah, guilty of both over here all the time. But no, the awareness is key. And I absolutely love that focus and the starting point there so that you can build upon that. Let's talk about protein a little bit. And I get the question often, do I really need that much protein? Do I really need to eat 20 to 30 grams per each meal? You know, some of the pushback, which I know you get all the time, is how do I do that? It seems excessive. And why? I'd love for you to just kind of dive into that a little.
Question. Well, yeah. So one way of thinking about it is, listen, it's very reasonable to eat 25 to 35% of your calories from protein, right? Because the three macronutrients are protein, carbs, and fats.
Right.
Now, you have no problem eating enough carbs and fats, right? So it kind of begs the question of why does protein become such an issue? And so we can kind of get into that. But at the end of the day, yes, protein is a requisite. One, as just being an adequate amount of protein relative to your total calorie intake. So if we're eating 1,500 calories, it's not unreasonable for 500 of those calories, that's 33% of your calorie intake, to come from protein, which, by the way, 500 calories of protein is 100 and whatever, 120 grams, 110, 120 grams of protein, something like that. For a lot of women, that's a lot of protein. Is it necessary? Yeah. I mean, I guess it kind of depends on what the goals are. The reality is, if you want to retain lean muscle tissue, to say nothing of wanting to build lean muscle tissue, if you want to support your immune system, if you want to support your joint integrity, if you want to provide the raw materials and the essential amino acids that are going to help with hair, skin, and nails, and all of the things, the other things that I mentioned, then yes, like you need to eat enough protein relative to your total calorie intake, which, like I said, is whatever, 25 to 35% of your intake. So that comes down to shooting for most women is like a 30-gram portion or 30 grams of protein per meal, which 3 meals would be 90, 4 meals would be 120 grams. The reason that 30 grams is important, one, is just structurally, just to spread it out equally throughout the day, but more physiologically or biochemically, is we need to get enough protein at each feeding to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And that's ideal. We could certainly eat one meal of 100 grams of protein and one smaller meal, but it's more ideal to have it kind of spread out throughout the day, especially relative to training and regular meal timing and lifestyle and all of those things. So it's nuanced, but it's required, especially if you're eating all of those calories anyways from more carbs and fats. Likely you're not getting all of those carbs and fats from vegetables, from fruits, from potatoes and rice and avocado and olive oil and healthier foods. You're probably eating a bunch of junk, and you're trying to rationalize why you can't eat more real foods.
And rocking your blood sugar, right? Ultimately, which is just causing a whole host of other metabolic issues. So I talk a lot. We're just kind of focusing today a little bit more on maybe like the weight loss or the strength training perspective. And I work with a lot of women. We're just working on insulin resistance, which in turn is causing a lot of that belly fat, the stress that's involved, the belly fat that is like occurring and sticking there. We're not able to move. So getting that protein is also helping to stabilize your blood sugar, because for just like you said, that you're eating that instead of probably the chips that you were grabbing or the other things that you're using to bulk those calories. So
or the bar or the pastry or the Starbucks drink. And you're absolutely dead on around if you are finding it hard to see progress and you're doing all of the things that you used to do that didn't be problematic, then it kind of begs like, okay, what does your meal frequency look like? Are we doing things to stabilize blood sugar levels? And having that frequent dosing of protein throughout the day really does help create more blood sugar stability because protein is so satiating, because it doesn't directly impact blood sugar levels depending on the protein source and the person. And so it's that one kind of constant macronutrient and the foods that are most densely based in protein that keep us full for longer. They keep us satisfied. They help us manage our hunger and cravings. They help fuel our brain and our neurotransmitters so we can consistently make better decisions. And consistently we see, especially as an example of, and especially for women who are notorious for like waking up, not eating, drinking coffee and sugar, and just starting their day with these massive blood sugar and kind of cortisol roller coasters, where when we're consistently getting and front loading protein earlier in the day, they've set themselves up much better to make better decisions throughout the day and eat significantly less later on because they've created more stability.
And it is so, I've found for myself at least, the more you front load, like when I get that solid breakfast, my whole day goes better. I know I'm not the only one that experiences that. And it's much easier to get, if you're just trying to like back end the protein, right, on the end of the day, you're not going to be successful. So when you're breaking it up, but for me, like really getting that solid breakfast really sets me up to be able to accomplish getting the amount of protein that I might be trying to get in that time. Let's talk in regards. I know you're a father of 3 and you're very involved in like the meal prep and kind of hands-on there. I'd love to know, because I know people are thinking, because everything we're talking about applies to our kids too, especially when we're talking about blood sugar, we're talking about for neurodevelopment and the ability to not be brain fogged and processing. How do you incorporate like heavier protein into your kids' meals? So like what types of things do you guys just very practically like eat for breakfast? What do you guys pack for lunches? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we really are big proponents of kind of just having bulk prep and doing bulk prep. And so typically a couple days a week, I'll cook up a couple different meat sources, maybe a couple different veggies, and maybe some starchy carbs. So that might look like, actually most recently was like a big 4 pounds of lean ground beef with some onions in it and seasoned up. I grilled a bunch of chicken breast and had it marinated. And so we have that in the fridge. And then we might have either like potatoes or rice on hand. And then we do right now, especially a lot of fruit. And so usually breakfasts look like, it depends on the kid too, because
Of course.
they're different things. But like my oldest always, she straight up had ground beef and rice for breakfast. And she'll just take it out of the dish and she'll throw it in the microwave and she'll smash that. Our middle, I made her eggs and some gluten-free toast and made her like a little breakfast sandwich. And then Caleb, our youngest, he'll kind of do some combination of the two, or it might just be like a smoothie with whey protein powder and a couple other things in there. And then lunches usually are something similar. It might be like one of those thermos containers with rice and ground beef, or we'll cut up the chicken and we'll put some soy sauce in there, or it might be some salsa in there, something like that. So we rely a lot on the thermoses and just doing real food. We do a lot of steak. And so it could be steak and rice or steak and potato. And then they'll do, fruit and maybe some snacky things on the side. But it's remarkably simple.
I was just going to say that. I think for the people listening, like it's okay to be simple and that you're not eating just breakfast foods for breakfast. I think like debunking that too. Like you can eat steak for breakfast. You can eat ground beef for breakfast. So whatever you bulk prep, like incorporate that in and use it. It doesn't have to be pancakes and waffles.
I would strongly encourage you to eat steak and red meat for breakfast. And the
why
reason
is that?
for that is, like we talked about, from a satiety standpoint. I think also mainly from a brain neurotransmitter standpoint and the impact on dopamine that we see from red meat. And so dopamine is our neurotransmitter of much more like drive and focus. And so especially when we're talking about kids, like the last thing that you want to start their day with is is cereal and juice and sugary yogurt or pastries or shit like that. And very much like if I could do meat and nuts, maybe some fruit, that's kind of like the gold standard for what we see. And goes the same. So it's sort of like heavier in protein and fat earlier on in the day for a lot of people works really, really well. And then depending on physical activity and depending on the person, we can start to introduce more carbs later on because carbs start to induce more serotonin, which helps us wind down a little bit more. And so that can help with sort of de-stressing. In fact, that's part of the reason why a lot of people turn to more carbs when they're super stressed, because it helps them release the serotonin and get this artificial wind down and activate their parasympathetic nervous system. So we do everything we can within reason to just try and reinforce, like, do we have some of these foods prepared? Can I whip them together? Can I do some steak and eggs? Right. And can we send them with some real food? Otherwise, it's like deli meat, some swirled up deli meat, some fruit.
Yeah, we do the same. We use the thermos a lot. And it's a lot of dinner leftovers that end up going in the thermos. And of course, I try to make sure it's things they like, right? And if each kid has different combinations of that. But I think for a lot of times, I was like stuck in the mindset that like breakfast has to be breakfast. And I don't know, I think just America, like culture kind of gets you in that mindset. And that really helps to like open up. And the bulk, I'd say meat prep, really like the protein doesn't have to be meat, but ideally is so simple when it's in the fridge, because that's the part that takes the time. So if that is prepped, then you can make that into 100 different things, especially for dinners too. Yeah. If we have ground beef, we can do tacos, we can do taco salad, it can be chili, it can be all kinds of things. So I found that to be very, very helpful and effective. Just a few questions. Another thing I wanted to ask was, sometimes women feel overwhelmed by all of the trends, right? There's so much out there, and to know like what's right and what's true, like all the detoxes, the macros, the fasting, the carb cycling, like whatever it is. If someone is starting over and they're going like from the beginning, what would you say are just a few, if you were going to narrow it down, of like the non-negotiable basics that you should focus on? Like if you had it.
Yeah, I mean, the non-negotiable. So let's kind of, I would consider these to be like the foundational pillars, right? I think we kind of alluded to, maybe eating 3 or 4 meals a day without snacking in between. And at each of those meals, it really is imperative that we're trying to get 30 grams of quality protein. And that generally is going to be a more animal-based protein because it's the most dense source of protein and it's going to be the least processed. So I'm not a huge fan of all of the protein substitutes. And listen, we're very aware of the importance of protein. Now everything is marketed as high protein. We have high protein chips, we have high protein pancakes, and we have high protein bars and all the protein shakes. And if I'm being honest, it's not ideal, especially if we're talking about people with existing blood sugar dysregulation. You almost have to earn, it's kind of counterintuitive because you almost have to earn the right to be able to rely on those by having enough metabolic flexibility, not to get too into the weeds with what that means, but just being lean enough, having stable blood sugar levels, and having eaten well enough and exercised well enough for a long enough time that you can kind of get away with eating more of that junk. But really relying on more whole, real food consistently is going to be the biggest needle mover. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. So 3 to 4 meals without snacking, making sure you're getting enough real quality protein at each of those meals, making sure we're moving our body frequently enough throughout the day. So I would say accumulating more steps than likely what you're currently doing. And that might mean getting a pedometer or a Fitbit watch or an Apple Watch or just a waistband pedometer and starting to get a gauge, or just using your iPhone of how many steps you're currently getting and then committing to like ramping it up by 50%. But I think, whatever, 6 to 8 plus thousand steps per day, if you can hit 10,000, even better or more, is a great goal to have. Having a dedicated sleep routine, I think, is invaluable. And it kind of sets the stage for everything else. So if we can kind of bookend our day and say, if I can get to bed by 9 or 10, if I know I can sleep until 5 or 6, and I know I can get to sleep, I know what to do to be able to stay asleep. I know I can wake up without my alarm. That in and of itself is kind of going to set the stage for you being able to prepare more effectively, be more energy stable, and think more clearly. And then, like I said, prepare your meals, make good decisions. But when we're kind of playing catch up constantly, we're staying up later, eating too late at night, drinking alcohol, then we get poor quality sleep.
Then
And
we're
then we
stressed
wake up.
out.
Yeah, you're super
Yep.
stressed. And it makes it really, really challenging to put any of the other pieces in place.
No, I love that. Thank you for pointing those out. And I think one thing that I really I don't want to get off this podcast without talking about is how stress, it can be as, how do I want to say this? Like the root, right, of keeping you stuck, even if all of the other things are going well. I know you've worked with thousands of people at this point. I'd love you to talk a little bit of how you've seen that play out. Is stress being like a critical factor?
Yeah, and it's really one of these unquantifiable factors and variables that people just don't realize the role that it plays in keeping us stuck. And I think so much of it has to do, Kelly, with the way it impacts sleep. And so if we're just overwhelmed with so many different things, we can never actually get our body into a parasympathetic or like a rest and digest state, which what does that mean? It means we don't actually adequately digest, absorb, and assimilate our nutrients. We can't actually get deep, restful sleep. When we don't get deep and restful sleep, we're automatically more glucose and insulin resistant. We're going to have, meaning we don't do as well with the carbohydrates that we're consuming, meaning we're storing more of those as fat. We are going to have more hunger and cravings. We're going to be more leptin resistant. And so it just sets up this whole hormonal cascade of distress that is really hard to kind of dig our way out of. And that's where it's about kind of looking deeper into, well, what's contributing to all of these stressors? Because, and especially when I'm quote unquote doing all of the things right, it's like this goes way beyond the X's and O's of calories and exercise. You're miserable in your relationships. You hate your job. I just posted a video about this the other day, but it's like, it's all of these intangibles that have put you in this hormonal milieu that's ultimately going to keep you stuck. And until we address kind of the root cause of why the perceived stress is so high, you're going to have a really hard time unwinding or peeling the layers of the onion back.
Yeah, I see that a lot. I've experienced it a lot. And my husband will actually be the first person to tell you. In fact, he worked with you for years. I mean, I can remember the conversations like decreasing stress. And I think us just not really understanding like that really could be keeping you where you're at until, like, as some of you know, and we're going to share this story at some point on this podcast, but he had like a hemorrhagic stroke, which gave us like this stop, right? And then a rebuild kind of from like basics and nothing. And because we had to say no to so many things in the schedule, and it was kind of forced, and we look back, it's kind of a blessing in disguise at this point, but it allowed us to see, and we were watching so many things so closely, how stress truly affects the body. And it is a gift in so many ways. And don't wish that scenario on other people, but being able to see it so clearly, it's like, I just want to shout it from the rooftops. Like you've got to like unwind the stress. You've got to say no to the things. What is in your schedule? And if you're feeling that, what can be taken out? Make the time to work through the difficult relationship, the difficult emotion, because it's just so important to the entire process. It's all hooked together. It's all a cycle. You know, the true nutrition affects the hormones and the stress and the cortisol. But aside from like the basics of the foundations of nutrition and things like that, I really do feel super strongly about the stress piece. And when people start to unlayer that and they can get themselves back into the parasympathetic state is when change really starts to happen.
It's just the most intangible component that keeps so many people stuck. And it's not even like this sort of metabolic resistance, like I'm barely eating and I can't lose weight. And more often than people realize, it's how that stress contributes to the change in your behaviors of you actually overeating and not realizing it, over drinking and not acknowledging it, or sleeping less. And then all of a sudden you're more insulin resistant. And in a world where we think it's just about doing more, one of the biggest changes, and I'll tell you, this is one of the biggest differentiators for a lot of the clients that I work with over 40 here, is like, it's not about doing more. It's about working smarter, not harder. It means what we're doing in the gym is, sure, it's intense, but it's structured in a way where we're not just beating ourselves up just to do more volume. And we're focusing on recovery because you're only going to be as good, right? Your training session is only going to be as good as your recovery. And we're using steps and sleep as parasympathetic drivers. And by the way, we're using nutrition and focusing on digestion and smart supplementation to the degree that when you can put all of those together, then we can really kind of start to optimize things versus a world where it's like, well, I'll just add more and then I'll do this and I'll try this. And we're just spinning our wheels.
I'll add this supplement or that supplement, or
it's never the solution. It's always going to be coming back. The people that are most successful, time and again, when we talked about those foundational pillars, they're eating structured meals. They're not snacking in between meals. They're getting good chunk of protein at their meals, and they're probably eating some starchy carbs and some vegetables, and they're moving their body frequently, and they're optimizing for sleep. And by the way, they probably have a good semblance of community that they're involved in, and they have a strong sense of purpose, and they're making sure they're getting enough sleep every night. And sure, they're working hard in the gym, but they're also recovering between sessions. And it's none of this like 2 times a day training nonsense. And when you factor all of that stuff in, it's like, it makes sense, but it's very, very challenging to actually commit to with all of the things that we put on our plate.
Yeah. I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time, your knowledge today, and just sharing in just your wheelhouse really with us. We're so grateful. Where can listeners learn more about you, your work, or connect for support if they wanted to?
Yeah, for sure. So we are at Body System. I'm sure you'll have all this in the show notes, but bodysystems.com is our website. Our podcast is the Smart Nutrition Made Simple show on all podcast platforms. And you've been on the show one time or a couple times?
I think just once.
Just once. And social media, probably Instagram. I'm most active on currently. We'll see how long that lasts. Speaking of stress. And that's at Body Systems Coaching. And yeah, we got a ton of resources. So don't hesitate to reach out and let me know how I can support you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here. And we will see you guys next week.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you for tuning in to Design Foundations. I hope today's episode left you feeling encouraged and equipped to take meaningful steps towards building a healthier, more intentional life for you and your family. If you found value in this conversation, I'd love for you to share it with someone else who might need this encouragement today. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling inspired, leave a review. It helps this message reach more families like yours. Until next time, remember, true wellness starts with a strong foundation, rooted in faith, and grows with intentional care. Take care, and I'll see you next week.
This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. The information shared is not a substitute for professional medical care. Always consult your healthcare provider before making any changes to your health or wellness routine.